The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Florence as Niccolò Machiavelli walked through the narrow streets, his mind churning with observations that would reshape how power is understood for centuries to come. In the shadows of the Medici palaces and the whispered conversations of courtiers, he discovered truths that most would rather remain hidden. These were not the sanitized lessons taught in academies, but the raw, unvarnished mechanisms by which empires rise and fall, by which individuals ascend from obscurity to command the fate of nations. What emerged from his years of observation, political maneuvering, and careful study of history were 10 fundamental laws that govern the acquisition and maintenance of power. These laws operate beneath the surface of polite society, invisible to those who lack the perception to see them, yet absolutely decisive in determining who rises and who falls in the eternal struggle for influence and control. Part 1: The Foundation of Hidden Power. The first law that Machiavelli understood, watching the rise and fall of princes and republics alike, was that true power must be cultivated in silence before it can be exercised in the open. He observed how those who announced their ambitions too early found themselves crushed by coalitions of enemies, while those who moved with patience and stealth often achieved their goals before opposition could organize against them. The first law: never outshine the master. In the court of Lorenzo de' Medici, Machiavelli witnessed the fate of those who displayed their brilliance too openly. A young courtier named Giovanni possessed remarkable intelligence and wit, often providing solutions to problems that had stumped even Lorenzo's most trusted advisors. Giovanni's insights were invariably correct, his proposals invariably superior to those offered by others. Yet within 2 years, he found himself exiled from Florence on trumped-up charges of sedition. The lesson was clear: those in power fear being overshadowed more than they fear being wrong. Giovanni's mistake was not in being brilliant, but in allowing his brilliance to make his master appear dim by comparison. The wise individual learns to make their superior feel like the source of all good ideas, to present their insights in such a way that the master believes them to be his own inspiration. This requires a particular form of intelligence that goes beyond mere cleverness. It demands the ability to read the psychology of those above you, to understand their insecurities and vanities, and to position yourself as an indispensable support rather than a potential threat. The courtier who masters this art becomes irreplaceable precisely because they make their master feel irreplaceable. Machiavelli noted how the most successful advisors in history were those who possessed this quality. They might have been the true architects of policy, the genuine sources of strategic insight, but they ensured that credit flowed upward while influence flowed to them. They understood that visible power is often fragile power, while hidden influence can endure for decades. The second law: never put too much trust in friends. The second law emerged from Machiavelli's observation of countless betrayals that shaped the political landscape of his time. Friends, he realized, are particularly dangerous because they know your weaknesses, your methods, and your secrets. Moreover, friendship creates expectations that can become burdensome when power considerations demand different choices. Consider the relationship between Cesare Borgia and his childhood friend Paolo, whom Cesare elevated to a position of significant responsibility in his expanding territories. Paolo had access to Cesare's plans, understood his strategic thinking, and commanded troops that could have been turned against his benefactor. When political necessity required Cesare to form an alliance that directly opposed Paolo's interests, the friendship became a liability rather than an asset. The problem with friends in positions of power is that they assume a level of consideration and loyalty that may conflict with strategic necessities. They believe their relationship grants them immunity from the harsh calculations that govern political action. This assumption makes them both unreliable and dangerous when circumstances require decisions that prioritize political survival over personal loyalty. Instead, Machiavelli observed that the most successful leaders surrounded themselves with individuals who owed their position entirely to the leader's continued favor. These people had no independent base of power, no alternative loyalties, and no illusions about the transactional nature of their relationship. They served effectively precisely because their service was their only means of maintaining their position. This does not mean that a leader should be friendless, but rather that the spheres of friendship and power should be kept carefully separate. Personal relationships should exist outside the realm of political calculation, while political relationships should be based on clear mutual benefit rather than sentiment or history. The third law: conceal your intentions. The third law grew from Machiavelli's understanding that predictability is the enemy of effective action. When your opponents can anticipate your moves, they can prepare countermeasures. When allies assume they understand your goals, they may act in ways that undermine your actual strategy. The art of concealment, therefore, becomes fundamental to maintaining the initiative in any competitive environment. This law operates on multiple levels. At the most basic level, it involves keeping your immediate tactical plans secret until the moment of execution. But more sophisticated practitioners understand that concealment extends to hiding your long-term strategic objectives, your true priorities, and even your genuine character from those who might use such knowledge against you. Machiavelli observed how Duke Valentino, Cesare Borgia, masterfully employed this principle during his campaigns in Romagna. While appearing to pursue conventional military objectives, he was simultaneously undermining the political foundations of his enemy's power. His opponents prepared for traditional warfare while he waged a campaign of political subversion that made military resistance impossible. By the time they understood his true strategy, they lacked the resources to counter it effectively. The concealment of intentions requires considerable discipline and strategic thinking. It means accepting that you will often be misunderstood, that others may attribute wrong motives to your actions, and that you cannot seek immediate recognition for your cleverness. The reward for this discipline is the ability to act while your opponents react, to set the terms of engagement rather than respond to terms set by others. Effective concealment also involves the art of misdirection. Rather than simply hiding your intentions, you can actively mislead others about what you plan to do. This might involve publicly pursuing objectives that you don't actually care about while quietly advancing your real agenda, or demonstrating patterns of behavior that lead others to make incorrect assumptions about your future actions. The fourth law, always say less than necessary. The fourth law reflects Machiavelli's understanding that words, once spoken, become weapons that others can use against you. Every statement creates commitments, reveals information, or provides material for future attacks. The individual who speaks too freely gives away advantages that silence would preserve. In the complex negotiations that surrounded the various Italian wars of his time, Machiavelli observed how skilled diplomats used silence and minimal communication as tools of influence. When Giuliano della Rovere, later Pope Julius II, was asked about his intentions regarding Venice, his response was so brief and cryptic that each party to the conversation believed he had signaled support for their position. This ambiguity allowed him to maintain relationships with multiple parties until circumstances clarified which alliance would serve his interests best. The power of saying less extends beyond diplomatic contexts. In any situation where information has value, the person who controls the flow of information holds a significant advantage. This might involve knowing when to withhold details that others assume you will share, or responding to questions with questions that redirect the conversation away from topics you prefer not to discuss. Moreover, excessive talking often reveals more about your thinking process, your priorities, and your emotional state than the content of your words might suggest. The person who speaks constantly gives others extensive data about how they make decisions, what pressures affect them, and how they might be influenced or manipulated. The discipline of restrained communication also forces you to think more carefully before speaking. When you know that your words will be few, you choose them with greater precision. This tends to make your communication more impactful when you do speak, as others learn to pay attention to your rare pronouncements. The fifth law, so much depends on reputation. The fifth law emerged from Machiavelli's observation that reputation often matters more than reality in determining outcomes. People make decisions based on their perceptions of your capabilities, your character, and your track record, even when those perceptions may not align perfectly with objective facts. Therefore, the careful cultivation and protection of reputation becomes a critical strategic priority. Reputation operates as a force multiplier for all other forms of power. A reputation for competence makes others more likely to support your initiatives, while a reputation for ruthlessness may deter potential enemies without requiring you to actually exercise force. Similarly, a reputation for keeping your word makes negotiation easier, while a reputation for strategic thinking causes others to look for deeper meanings in even your casual actions. Machiavelli noted how Federico da Montefeltro, Duke of Urbino, leveraged his reputation as an honorable condottiero to command premium fees for his military services. Potential employers knew that Federico would fulfill his contracts completely and would not switch sides for a better offer once committed. This reputation allowed him to charge significantly more than competitors whose loyalty was questionable, and it ensured a steady stream of employment opportunities. However, reputation is also fragile and can be destroyed by single incidents that undermine the narrative you have carefully constructed. This means that every action must be evaluated not only for its immediate consequences but also for its impact on how others perceive you. Sometimes this requires sacrificing short-term gains to preserve long-term credibility. The cultivation of reputation also involves understanding that different audiences may require different impressions. The reputation that serves you well with superiors might be counterproductive with subordinates, while the image that works in professional contexts might be inappropriate in personal relationships. The sophisticated practitioner learns to manage multiple reputations simultaneously, presenting the aspect of their character that serves them best in each particular context. Part 2, The Architecture of Influence. As Machiavelli's understanding deepened through years of observing political dynamics in Florence, Rome, and the various Italian city-states, he began to perceive more subtle patterns in how power operates. The second phase of his insights dealt with the architecture of influence, how power structures are built, maintained, and leveraged to achieve objectives that might seem impossible through direct action. The sixth law, court attention at all costs. The sixth law reflected Machiavelli's recognition that in a world of competing interests and limited resources, obscurity is death. Those who fail to capture and hold attention find themselves excluded from opportunities, ignored in crucial decisions, and ultimately relegated to irrelevance regardless of their actual capabilities or contributions. This law operates on the principle that human attention is finite and, therefore, valuable. In any organization, community, or political system, there are far more people seeking advancement than there are positions of influence available. Those who master the art of capturing attention create opportunities for themselves, while those who remain invisible, no matter how talented, are easily overlooked when important decisions are made. Machiavelli observed this principle in action during the various ceremonies and public events that marked Florentine political life. Those individuals who found ways to distinguish themselves, through bold statements, dramatic gestures, or even carefully orchestrated controversies, inevitably became more influential than their more cautious peers who possessed equal or superior qualifications but lacked the ability to command notice. The challenge lies in courting attention in ways that enhance rather than damage your reputation and prospects. Negative attention can be as valuable as positive attention, provided it doesn't undermine your fundamental credibility or character. Sometimes being known as a troublemaker or contrarian is better than being unknown altogether, as long as you're also known for being effective. The art of attention management also involves timing. There are moments when visibility serves your interests and moments when it does not. The skilled practitioner learns to recognize when to step into the spotlight and when to fade into the background, understanding that the ability to control your visibility is itself a form of power. Furthermore, sustainable attention requires substance to back up the initial impression. While dramatic gestures might capture notice initially, maintaining influence over time requires delivering results that justify the attention you've received. The goal is to use attention as a platform for demonstrating genuine value, not as a substitute for actual achievement. The seventh law, get others to do the work for you. The seventh law grew from Machiavelli's understanding that individual capacity has limits, but the ability to mobilize others' efforts has virtually no boundaries. The most successful individuals are not necessarily those who work hardest themselves, but those who become most effective at channeling others' work toward their own objectives. This principle operates through multiple mechanisms. At the most basic level, it involves delegation and the management of subordinates. But more sophisticated applications involve getting people who don't work for you directly to advance your agenda, either because they believe it serves their interests or because you've structured situations so that pursuing their goals requires helping you achieve yours. Machiavelli witnessed this principle during the complex maneuvering around the League of Cambrai, where various powers found themselves working to advance objectives that ultimately served interests other than their own. Through careful diplomacy and strategic ambiguity, certain players managed to get their nominal enemies to take actions that weakened those enemies' own positions while strengthening the puppet master's influence. The key to implementing this law effectively lies in understanding what motivates others and how to align those motivations with your objectives. This might involve offering them credit for successes, helping them achieve their own goals as a byproduct of your initiatives, or simply making it easier for them to do what you want than to pursue alternative courses of action. Another aspect of this law involves learning from others' work and experiences rather than having to develop every insight through your own trial and error. The person who masters this skill can achieve in years what might otherwise take decades, by building upon foundations that others have already established rather than starting from scratch. The implementation of this law requires overcoming the natural human tendency to want personal credit for achievements. The individual who insists on being recognized for every contribution may achieve personal satisfaction but will find it difficult to mobilize others' efforts effectively. Those who are willing to share credit, or even to let others take credit entirely, often find that they can accomplish far more through indirect influence than through direct action. The eighth law, make other people come to you. The eighth law reflects Machiavelli's understanding that the person who sets the terms of engagement holds a significant advantage over those who must respond to conditions established by others. When you can make others come to you, whether literally or figuratively, you control the timing, the context, and, often the agenda of important interactions. This law operates on multiple levels, from physical positioning to psychological dynamics. At the most concrete level, it might involve choosing meeting locations that are convenient for you and inconvenient for others, or scheduling interactions at times that suit your rhythm rather than theirs. But, the deeper applications involve creating situations where others need what you have to offer more than you need what they can provide. Machiavelli observed this principle in the diplomatic practices of the most successful Italian leaders of his time. Rather than traveling to negotiate with others, they created conditions that made it advantageous for others to seek them out. This might involve building reputations as indispensable mediators, controlling access to crucial resources, or positioning themselves as gatekeepers to important opportunities. The psychological advantage of having others come to you is significant. The person who seeks a meeting typically needs something more than the person who grants it. This creates an implicit power dynamic that influences the entire interaction, often in ways that both parties only dimly perceive. Creating this dynamic requires building something that others value and cannot easily obtain elsewhere. This might be expertise, connections, resources, or simply a reputation for making things happen. The goal is to become someone whom others benefit from knowing and dealing with, rather than someone who is always seeking favors or opportunities from others. However, this law must be balanced against the need to maintain relationships and avoid appearing arrogant or inaccessible. The art lies in making yourself valuable enough that others want to approach you, while remaining approachable enough that they actually will. The person who becomes too difficult to reach may find that others simply route around them rather than making the effort to engage. The ninth law, win through your actions, never through argument. The ninth law emerged from Machiavelli's observation that arguments rarely change minds in any fundamental way, especially when significant interests are at stake. People's positions on important matters are usually based on a combination of self-interest, emotion, and deeply held beliefs that are not easily altered by logical discourse. Trying to win through argument often succeeds only in revealing your own position while hardening opposition against you. Actions, by contrast, create new realities that others must acknowledge regardless of their theoretical positions. When you demonstrate capability, achieve results, or create facts on the ground, you establish your credibility in ways that no amount of discussion could accomplish. Moreover, actions often speak to people's interests and emotions more effectively than abstract arguments ever could. Machiavelli witnessed this principle during various military and political campaigns where commanders who spent time explaining and justifying their strategies often found themselves bogged down in debates with subordinates and allies, while those who simply executed effective plans earned respect and compliance through demonstrated success. The application of this law requires shifting focus from proving you're right to proving you're effective. Rather than spending energy on convincing others that your approach is theoretically sound, you invest that energy in implementing your approach and letting the results speak for themselves. This often requires accepting that others may not understand or approve of your methods initially, trusting that successful outcomes will ultimately validate your choices. This principle also applies to personal reputation and credibility. Rather than telling people about your capabilities, you demonstrate them through performance. Rather than arguing that you deserve opportunities or recognition, you create situations where your contributions become impossible to ignore. However, winning through actions requires patience and confidence. Results often take time to manifest, and there may be periods when your approach seems questionable to observers who don't understand your full strategy. The person who applies this law effectively must be willing to be temporarily misunderstood in exchange for ultimately being undeniably successful. The 10th law, infection, avoid the unhappy and unlucky. The 10th and final law reflects Machiavelli's understanding that emotional states, luck patterns, and success trajectories are often contagious in ways that are not immediately obvious but are nonetheless powerful in their effects. People unconsciously adopt the attitudes, expectations, and behaviors of those they spend time with, which means that your choice of association significantly influences your own trajectory. This law operates through multiple mechanisms. At the psychological level, constant exposure to negativity, complaints, and pessimistic thinking tends to erode your own mental resilience and creative problem-solving abilities. People who consistently expect failure often unconsciously take actions that make failure more likely, and their influence can cause you to adopt similar self-defeating patterns. At the practical level, unlucky people often become unlucky through poor judgment, inadequate preparation, or self-destructive behaviors. While some misfortune is genuinely random, persistent bad luck is frequently the result of identifiable errors in decision-making or execution. Associating closely with such people can expose you to the consequences of their poor choices and can limit your access to opportunities that require reliability and good judgment. Machiavelli observed this principle in the various courts and political environments he encountered. Successful leaders typically surrounded themselves with optimistic, capable individuals who expected success and worked effectively to achieve it. Those who allowed themselves to be surrounded by complainers, pessimists, and consistently unsuccessful people found their own effectiveness diminished, regardless of their personal capabilities. The application of this law does not require cruelty or complete abandonment of struggling individuals. Rather, it involves making strategic choices about where you invest your time, energy, and emotional resources. You can maintain compassionate relationships with people who are going through difficult periods without allowing their circumstances to dominate your environment or influence your decision-making. The positive corollary of this law is equally important. Deliberately seeking out association with successful, optimistic, and effective people tends to elevate your own performance and opportunities. Such people often share useful knowledge, provide access to valuable networks, and model behaviors and attitudes that contribute to success. Part 3, The Mastery of Strategic Transformation. In the final phase of his observations, Machiavelli began to understand how these individual laws combine to create comprehensive strategies for long-term success and survival. This third part of his understanding dealt with the integration of power techniques into coherent approaches for navigating complex, changing environments while building sustainable influence. The synthesis of these 10 laws creates a framework for what Machiavelli would recognize as true strategic mastery. This involves not just applying individual techniques, but understanding how they interact with each other and how to adapt their application to different contexts and challenges. The first principle of integration involves recognizing that these laws exist in tension with each other and require careful balancing. For example, the need to court attention, Law 6, must be balanced against the importance of concealing intentions, Law 3. The art lies in being visible enough to create opportunities while remaining mysterious enough to maintain strategic advantage. Similarly, the imperative to make others do work for you, Law 7, must be harmonized with the need to win through your own actions, Law 9. This requires understanding when to work through others and when to demonstrate personal capability, and how to get credit for orchestrating successful outcomes even when much of the actual work is done by others. The successful integration of these laws also requires developing what Machiavelli would recognize as strategic flexibility. The same situation might call for different approaches depending on your current position, the specific people involved, and the broader context. Someone rising in an organization might need to emphasize certain laws, while someone already in a position of authority might need to emphasize others. Moreover, the application of these laws must evolve as circumstances change. Techniques that work well in one phase of your development may become counterproductive in another. The person who masters these principles understands that they represent a toolkit rather than a rigid formula, and that wisdom lies in selecting the right tools for each specific situation. The ultimate goal of mastering these laws is not merely personal advancement, but the development of genuine strategic capability that can be applied across different domains and challenges. This involves understanding power not as an end in itself, but as a means of creating the conditions necessary to achieve meaningful objectives and to navigate effectively in complex, competitive environments. Machiavelli's insights suggest that true mastery requires integrating these techniques with genuine competence and ethical consideration. While the laws themselves are amoral tools that can be used for various purposes, their most effective application typically occurs when they serve larger goals that provide meaning and direction beyond mere self-interest. The person who achieves this level of integration becomes what Machiavelli might recognize as a complete strategic thinker, someone capable of understanding complex situations, anticipating the responses of others, and taking actions that create desired outcomes while minimizing unintended consequences. This represents not just tactical cleverness, but wisdom in the deepest sense of the term. Furthermore, the mastery of these laws creates a foundation for what could be called strategic leadership, the ability to guide others and shape outcomes in ways that create value for multiple parties while advancing your own objectives. This goes beyond mere manipulation or self-advancement to encompass the ability to create conditions where others can succeed while you achieve your goals. The implementation of this integrated approach requires constant attention to the feedback loops between actions and consequences. Each application of these laws generates responses from others, which in turn create new situations requiring adapted strategies. The successful practitioner develops the ability to read these patterns and adjust their approach continuously while maintaining consistency in their long-term objectives. Ultimately, Machiavelli's 10 hidden laws of power represent a sophisticated understanding of human nature and social dynamics that remains relevant across different eras and contexts. They describe patterns that emerge from the fundamental realities of competition, cooperation, and the pursuit of goals in environments where multiple actors have conflicting interests. The transformation that occurs through mastering these laws is not merely external advancement, but the development of a more complete understanding of how human systems operate and how to navigate them effectively. This understanding becomes a form of wisdom that enhances every aspect of decision-making and relationship management. The ruthless aspect of rising through these methods lies not in cruelty or destructiveness, but in the disciplined application of realistic principles without being deterred by sentiment, wishful thinking, or conventional limitations. It involves being honest about how power actually works rather than how we might prefer it to work, and acting on that knowledge consistently and effectively. Those who master this approach find themselves capable of achieving objectives that seemed impossible through conventional methods. They develop the ability to influence outcomes, build lasting relationships based on mutual benefit rather than mere sentiment, and create conditions that allow them to pursue their most important goals while helping others achieve theirs. The quiet transformation involves developing these capabilities without announcing your methods or seeking credit for your strategic sophistication. Others see the results, your increased effectiveness, your ability to navigate difficult situations, your success in achieving objectives, without necessarily understanding the systematic approach that makes these outcomes possible. This combination of visible results and invisible methods creates a powerful foundation for long-term influence and success. People learn to trust your judgment and seek your involvement in important matters, not because they understand your techniques, but because they observe your consistent ability to make things work out well for yourself and others. In the end, Machiavelli's hidden laws of power represent more than mere tactics for personal advancement. They describe a comprehensive approach to understanding and navigating the complex realities of human interaction, competition, and cooperation. Their mastery leads not just to external success, but to a deeper wisdom about how to live effectively in a world where your outcomes depend significantly on your ability to understand and influence others while building something meaningful for yourself and those you choose to serve. The person who truly understands and applies these principles becomes someone who transforms quietly, developing capabilities and influence without fanfare, and rises ruthlessly, achieving objectives through disciplined application of realistic strategies rather than hope, luck, or conventional approaches. This represents not corruption or manipulation, but mastery of the actual dynamics through which human societies operate and through which meaningful goals can be achieved in complex, competitive environments. Through this understanding, Machiavelli's insights become not just historical observations, but practical wisdom for anyone seeking to build influence, achieve objectives, and create meaningful outcomes in their personal and professional life. The laws operate as powerfully today as they did in Renaissance Italy, because they describe fundamental aspects of human nature and social dynamics that transcend specific historical contexts and cultural conditions. These observations emerged from careful study of power dynamics across different contexts and historical periods, synthesized into practical principles for understanding and navigating complex human systems. Their application requires wisdom, ethical consideration, and genuine competence, but provides a realistic foundation for achieving meaningful objectives in competitive environments where conventional approaches often prove insufficient.